Do you want to record a podcast over the internet but don't really know how to go about it? In this video, I give you my current 5-step roadmap. Hello and welcome to a new video here on our channel. My name is Kurt Wojcicki. I am the owner of Kurt Creative, a 100% digital content marketing company, and we specialize in the professional production of corporate podcasts, among other things, because more and more companies are working remotely and the interviewees for the interviews are located in many different places, sometimes all over the world. The topic of recording podcasts over the internet has become increasingly important. And a frequent question from my customers when they start recording a podcast is, how do I actually do it technically? Which microphone do I need? Which software do I use to record the interviews? And how does the whole thing work organizationally? I have a few top recommendations for you that most of my clients use successfully and with which we have had very good experiences. And that brings us to the first step, which is to find and set up a suitable microphone for your recording. I always recommend a USB microphone for remote interviews, i.e. for interviews over the internet or if you are recording yourself alone. The advantage of a USB microphone is that you can connect it directly to your computer via USB, so you don't need to use another interface and can get started straight away. A highly recommended model is the Rode NT USB Mini. It's also important that you use headphones for your recording, even simple earpods that come with your cell phone or simple headband headphones. The main thing here is to avoid feedback, because if you hear your guest through speakers, the guest's sound will also be picked up by your microphone, and this will create an unpleasant echo effect, which we naturally want to avoid. It also makes sense to place your microphone on a stand. For example, this microphone here, which I have just screwed onto a table stand, simply to bring the microphone closer to the mouth. A distance of 10 centimeters is ideal, and with such a table stand, you have space on the desk and at the same time ensure that your microphone is always at the right height. Step number 2, ensure a quiet recording environment. This is a point that many people underestimate, but the room has a very decisive influence on whether your recording will sound good or not in the end. For example, I'm recording in a meeting room right now simply because it's a video and it's visually nicer. However, I wouldn't necessarily record a podcast interview here because it echoes. As you may have noticed, in larger rooms with little furniture, you always have a very strong reverberation effect, and you should of course avoid this. It is therefore better to record in smaller rooms where there is a lot of furniture, preferably textile furniture, which absorbs the reverberation particularly well. Of course, you should also pay attention to typical sources of background noise, such as fans, air conditioners, microwaves, washing machines, and street noise. You may not necessarily be aware of all these things that can generate noise in the background during the recording, but you will hear it on the recording, and that is of course very annoying afterwards. Therefore, be sure to check beforehand that there are no unwanted noises. Step number 3, arrange the interview date with your guest and send him or her an email with the dial-in link for the recording tool and some technical information. For many guests, this may be their first podcast interview, and it is of course very, very important that they feel well prepared. That's why I always recommend sending out an email at least a week beforehand, once the date has been clarified, with a confirmation of the date, perhaps a calendar invite so that they can enter the date in their calendar straight away, and a schedule of how the whole interview will run technically. What kind of microphone do you need? Of course, it is advisable if you also have a USB microphone. However, a better headset for the guest is also suitable. Which tool will be used for the recording? At best, of course, this should be a tool like Riverside, which offers good recording quality and also what requirements there are for it. In the case of Riverside, guests must use either the Chrome browser or the Microsoft Edge browser. You should definitely include this. You should also set up a so-called studio in your Riverside recording tool. A studio is a permanently active meeting room where you can invite your guests and make your recording. This studio has its own link that the guests can use to dial in, and you should ideally send this link to the guests in the first email with all the information. Then I always like to send the guests a little reminder the day before just to say, hey, I'm really looking forward to the interview with you. Do you have any technical questions? In the hustle and bustle of everyday life, some people may forget to ask again if there are any uncertainties. And so we can briefly point them out again. And the next step, step number 4, is actually our big interview day. Take your time to prepare for it and perhaps make a list of the questions or at least the big topics you want to talk about in the interview, and also enter the studio in Riverside 15 minutes before the guest to test all the settings and check whether you have connected your microphone correctly, the technology is working, and so on. You can also make a test recording there, download it, and check whether the sound of your own recording is satisfactory for you. Even after the guest has logged into Riverside, you should of course check again in the right-hand sidebar whether the guest has selected the correct microphone, whether the guest can hear themselves well, that there is no feedback, that the guest is also using headphones, and of course, whether the sound of the recording is good. I would briefly clarify all of this in a 1 to 2 minute preliminary talk, and then you can start recording. The recording is running, your interview is underway, and afterwards you should of course make sure that all local recordings, especially those of your guest, are fully uploaded to Riverside. If this is the case, you can leave the studio, say goodbye to the guest, and then download your recordings in Riverside. The last step after the interview is to download the recordings from Riverside, load them into an editing program, and get them ready for publication. In other words, we cut out any slips of the tongue, long pauses, and perhaps even filler words from the recording, and wrap the whole thing up with our intro and outro. Of course, it's also very good to go over the recording again with an equalizer and a compressor for a particularly nice sound. And if you say that the whole recording is far too complicated for you, you don't have time to get to grips with it, and you still want it to sound professional, then of course we can offer you our podcast editing services. With our podcast editing services, all you have to do is send us your raw recordings, and we will then make sure they sound perfect and of course upload them to your hoster on your behalf so that they can then go online on popular apps such as Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If this is of interest to you, you will of course also find a link to our website and our podcast editing services in the info box below. That was my 5-step roadmap for your remote podcast recording, and of course I'm also interested in your experiences. How do you record your podcasts? Feel free to write in the comments below about your experiences and whether you have any questions or even tips for our community. And if you don't want to miss another video from us, then subscribe to this channel and activate the bell so that you will always be informed as soon as a new video about podcasting and content marketing goes online. For now, have fun podcasting and see you in the next video.